Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'est un honneur se lever pour célébrer le Jubilé de diamant de notre Majesté la Reine Elizabeth II. We salute today the 60th anniversary of Canada's Queen. On June 2nd, 1953, Her Majesty was asked in the coronation oath in the presence of the Prime Minister Louis Saint-Laurent and the Canadian delegation at Westminster Abbey to solemnly promise and swear to govern the peoples of, among other realms, Canada, according to the respective laws and customs. This the Queen solemnly promised to do. This solemn oath made 60 years ago in the presence of the Canadian Prime Minister and officials, the Queen has upheld to the fullness of her considerable ability and with the magnificent charm and grace for which Her Majesty is known throughout the world. Combien de peuples à travers le monde déchirés par la guerre et la corruption au plus haut niveau voudraient être à notre place ici, au Canada, dû à la stabilité de nos institutions, la paix et le bon ordre de notre première institution d'État, la couronne. Combien de gens sages constatent avec envie la force, la persévérance dévouée, la grande sagesse de notre très gracieux chef d'État. 2 years ago, Her Majesty and His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, made their 22nd official visit to Canada. They have met more Canadians and shaken more hands and opened more events and institutions than even the most experienced members of this House can claim to have done in their long career. Elle a servi en tant que colonel en chef, capitaine général et doyen des capitaines de fiers régiments, dont le Royal 22e, le régiment de la Chaudière, l'aviation royale canadienne, les gouverneurs généraux, les fougardes du gouverneur général et les Calgary Highlanders. She is patron of over 33 charities in Canada, including the Canadian Red Cross, the Canadian Nurses Association, the Royal Canadian Legion, the Canadian Cancer Society, and Save the Children, amongst many others. In a life dedicated to serving others, Her Majesty has served Canadians and become intimately acquainted with our country, its regions, its peoples, our hopes and aspirations. It is Her Majesty the Queen who opened the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959, invoking the Allied victory in which Canada and the United States shared 14 years earlier, and calling the Seaway a victory of another kind. In English and French, she invoked Canadian history from the times of Cartier and La Salle to the present, the scene of so much of North American history. Her Majesty's life has been the history of Canada. She has known personally every Prime Minister since Mackenzie King, whom she met as Princess Elizabeth in London in the 1940s. While it's not known if she met R.B. Bennett, she did meet Arthur Mahan during the 1951 royal tour, a year before she became Queen. Canada has had 22 Prime Ministers up to today, and the Queen has known 13 of them. More than half of all the Prime Ministers in the history of Canada since we refounded our country with Dominion status in 1867. In fact, the story goes that even Pierre Trudeau was known to admire the Queen personally. It is even said that so great was his personal regard for Her Majesty, as a stateswoman with encyclopedic knowledge of Canada, that he deliberately entrenched the monarchy in the Constitution Act of 1982, which of course can only be amended in this respect with the unanimity of all provinces. It was Her Majesty the Queen who opened the Canadian Centennial celebrations of 1967, the Centennial of Confederation. It is the Queen who signed into force the Constitution Act of 1982 in front of these Houses of Parliament. The Queen then has been with us on all the most important occasions of our modern national life. She has borne with us through thick and thin, through peace and war, as she did in the service of His Majesty's forces during the Second World War, through prosperity and times of economic downturn. La continuité constitue un des principaux thèmes du Jubilé de diamant de la Reine Elizabeth. Nous éprouvons une très grande fierté en constatant que Sa Majesté continue la grande tradition de la couronne, gardienne de nos droits en tant que Canadiens, notamment la protection de la liberté de religion, de la langue et du système de droit civil. Notre monarchie constitutionnelle a survécu à toutes les guerres, toutes les révolutions, toujours loyale au peuple canadien et aux droits de nos concitoyens. She shares with that powerful and evocative symbol of Canada's founding, Queen Victoria, who chose the location of the capital in which we sit, the achievement of 60 years on the throne. In 1897, the Prime Minister, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, was in London for the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth's great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. A few years later, this great Quebecer, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, known above all for his Canadian patriotism, celebrated the Canadian role in uniting the Canadian family throughout, at the time, the British Empire during the South African War. Laurier overcame his earlier opposition to that conflict and instead came to recognize that Canada's service under the Crown on the African veldt was a source of pride and international prestige. Is there a man, Laurier said in this House in 1900, whose bosom did not swell with pride, the noblest of all pride, the pride of pure patriotism, the pride of the consciousness of our rising strength, the pride of the consciousness that that day the fact had been revealed to the world that a new power had risen in the West under the Crown. This quotation from 112 years ago is how I answer that charge that Canada's monarchy is somehow a hindrance to our sense of nationality in 2012. The Queen is Canadian. All of the proud associations we share with the monarchy are Canadian through and through. Canada, in fact, Canadianized the monarchy in 1931 with the Statute of Westminster. Before then, it could be argued that we shared a common imperial crown, but after 1931, Canada had a monarchy in its own right. Dans une époque d'internationalisme et dans un pays avec plusieurs régions, 3 peuples fondatrices et 2 langues officielles, il est un grand avantage d'avoir un chef d'État qui ne réside pas au Québec ou en Ontario ou dans une autre région, mais qui peut visiter chaque région de façon aussi égale que possible. La reine Élisabeth représente toutes les régions et tous les peuples canadiens de façon égale. When we speak of the Crown in Canada, whether in this Parliament or in a myriad institutions across the country, we are speaking of a uniquely Canadian institution, shaped and tailored by Canadians over the decades and generations to our own needs and requirements. It is not something imposed on us. We ourselves have chosen it and continue to choose it every time we reopen this House and this Parliament in Her Majesty's name and under her mantle. And every day we Canadians enjoy the protection and benediction of that crown and mantle. Every day we open this House, praying for our Sovereign Lady, the Queen. So let me close with a prayer, one that is an invocation from the Canadian Book of Common Prayer for the Queen in celebration of this remarkable achievement, her Diamond Jubilee. O Lord, the only ruler of princes, who dost from thy throne behold all the dwellers upon earth, most heartily we beseech thee with thy favor to behold our most gracious Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth, that she may always incline to thy will and walk in thy way. Endue her plenteously with heavenly gifts, grant her in health and wealth long to live, strengthen her that she may vanquish and overcome all her enemies, and finally, after this life, may she attain everlasting joy and felicity. Mr. Speaker, c'est un grand honneur et un privilège au nom de tous les députés, de toutes les régions du pays et au nom de tous les peuples canadiens, à féliciter notre reine, Elizabeth II, à la suite de 60 ans de service au peuple du Commonwealth et au peuple canadien. It is an honor to congratulate, on behalf of the Canadian people represented here in this chamber, Her Majesty upon achieving, by the grace of God, this tremendous milestone of 60 years as our gracious and faithful Queen. God bless Canada, and God save the Queen.
God save the Queen.